Please welcome Dr. Julio Frenk of the University of Miami and our esteemed panel.
Well, good afternoon. We've had an incredible day, a very productive day, and I'm pleased now to moderate this session. Climate change is, of course, the existential threat of our times, and Miami is being widely considered to be ground zero for the main impacts of climate change. I mean, the three big impacts, which are extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and the changing ecology of infectious diseases, particularly vector-borne diseases, as President Duque actually reminded us that that's another manifestation of climate change. They all converge here in Miami. So for us, as a university that is very focused on studying and understanding the big problems facing humanity, but also in devising solutions, climate change has been our absolute priority. When I arrived here 7.5 years ago, I did a very broad consultation, not just with members of the university, but also with our immediate community, civic leaders, government leaders, business leaders, and unanimously, the topic that everyone thought was most important for Miami, and I think this probably extends to the entire globe, but certainly for our community, was understanding and addressing the challenges of climate change. And that is why, as part of our strategic plan to our centennial, which is coming up in 2025, we have created something called the Climate Resilience Academy. The Academy understood not as a physical structure, but actually a little bit like in the spirit of Concordia, a convening entity that brings together all our intellectual assets across every discipline in the university to bear on this huge problem of climate change and its consequences. And today, we're going to give you a little bit of a sampling of the kind of very consequential work that is happening at the Academy, which is really a new model of organizing, breaking out of the disciplinary silos and bringing people from throughout the university in the natural sciences, in the social sciences, in architecture, in engineering, in the law, everyone in the arts and the humanities converging around solutions to climate change. We have a very distinguished panel of members of our academic community. Rudy el-Koury is the Dean of the University of Miami School of Architecture, and he's actually the interim director of the Climate Resilience Academy while we were searching for a permanent director. His current research in architecture focuses on applications for information technology, aiming for enhanced responsiveness and sustainability in buildings and smart cities, and that's a very interesting topic. Tony Nanni is the co-chair of the Climate Resilience Academy. He's the chair of the Department of Civil and Architectural Engineering here at the university and was recently elected president of the American Concrete Institute. His research interests cover construction materials, and again, it's with a focus on sustainability and civil infrastructure with that kind of focus on sustainability. Katharine Mach is a professor at our Rosenstiel School of Marine, Atmospheric and Earth Sciences, which is one of the premier schools in these disciplines, and she focuses specifically on environmental science and policy. Her research assesses climate change risks and response options to address increased flooding, extreme heat, wildfire, and other hazards. And last but certainly not least, Abigail Fleming is the Mason Foundation practitioner in residence at the University of Miami School of Law in their environmental justice clinic. Her work sits at the intersection of civil rights, environmental poverty, and public health law, tackling issues in South Florida, including climate change, contamination, environmental health, and municipal equity. So we have really an incredible sampling of the wide array of areas of expertise bearing on this problem. Let me start with Rudy el-Koury. Rudy, although your own work explores the technology-driven solutions to climate change impacts, it would be interesting to hear more broadly what you are doing with the Climate Resilience Academy at the university. Can you tell us about the institutional efforts and the support provided by the Academy?
Right, so yes, I would love to talk about what's going on in architecture, smart cities, etc., because there's so much new technology that's going to be very critical in devising solutions to climate change impacts. But also I want to emphasize how there's another way that the university contributes, it's an innovation in itself, is by designing and setting up new structures of support for the amazing work that my colleagues do. So there's a sense that those big problems we are facing require new approaches, adjustments that the traditional structure of departments, schools, etc., cannot accommodate. We have to do something more radical, build from the ground up a kind of functional unit that is actually going to incentivize, intensify, accelerate all the work. So just quickly, I'm going to tell you about some of the main functions. One is the convening functions, like this forum here, and very much in the spirit of the National Academies, bringing people together to work on the big problems, knowing that this is how the knowledge is exchanged, but also how they are critical, those meetings, in building bridges and constituting multidisciplinary and interinstitutional teams. So we have several symposia, conferences in the pipeline. The first one coming up is on April 7th. It's addressing climate change in relationship to health, societal and human health, followed by one on the natural and built environment, etc. So the academy is the hub or the clearinghouse for all of these climate-focused events. Another important function is the breaking the silos function. I know it sounds like a cliche in the academia, but we really mean it this time. The academy is designed to achieve this. It's incentivizing joint interdisciplinary appointments. These do not happen easily at the university. By funding those, also by building the framework to manage the tenure and the promotion process. Also, one of the ambitions is an educational one, and one of the biggest achievements so far is the creation of an interdisciplinary course with faculty involved from different units, each bringing a different perspective on climate change in different modules. This has been extremely successful, and we're proud of it. Another function is the funding, internal and external, and also the academy leading the charge in applying for external funding by managing these very complicated interdisciplinary applications. Partnerships. If you read the charter of the academy, you find these words over and over again. It's all about partnership. We think that we cannot devise these solutions without partnering with industry, with government, with NGOs, etc. So the future director of the academy, that's going to be their critical role, is actually to build those bridges and create those partnerships. I can go on forever about the academy. I'm going to stop here to let my colleagues speak.
Thank you. It's a very exciting project, and I should add the recruitment of that director is being supported by a very generous gift from Eric Levine that endowed a chair exactly to be able to recruit a top scholar or scientist in this field. So we're very excited about that. Let me turn to Professor Anthony Nanni. Tony, how can engineering innovation out of Miami address global resilience challenges? I know that you and several of your colleagues are working on innovation, especially in concrete as a structural material. Can you tell us a little bit about those innovations? Something that most people, when they talk about climate change, don't put those things together. Give us a little bit of examples of how the engineering approach can help.
Well, I'm most happy to be here and tell you a little bit of what we do in engineering. Actually, I'm terrified because there is this clock in front of me that tells me how much time I've left, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. To us in engineering, sustainability and resilience are the two faces of the same coin. So when we talk about resilience, we really speak about sustainability as well. And today I'm just going to focus on the resilience side of a material that I happen to love, that is concrete. And it's not very sexy, I have to admit. But if you think of the use that we make of this material, you will be amazed. After water is the material that is most used by mankind. From a sustainability standpoint, though, this material is responsible, depending on who does the counting, between 7 and 10% of the CO2 that we emit. So clearly, we need to do something about it. We need to do something because it's so relevant to the welfare of society, but it's also the reason for some of the problems that we have in terms of climate change. So focusing on some of the work that we do in engineering related to concrete, I would like to tell you about addressing the durability of it. And one of the major problems that we face in terms of both sustainability and resilience is the corrosion of the reinforcement. So at the U, we have developed, with others obviously, when you work in infrastructure, and Rudy kind of mentioned it, you cannot be by yourself. You are part of a team. And the team is other colleagues as well as people outside the university. If I could have the first slide, obviously I need to show you something exciting. If you start from the left-hand side, this is Flagler Beach, 2016, after Matthew. And you see what happened with when that hurricane landed. On the right-hand side, you see the same location, 2019, when together with the Florida DOT, and we contributed to this quite significantly, we built a seawall that is approximately 1 mile long, using a technology of composite reinforcement that doesn't rust. Actually, the idea of those cages came from a bridge that we built here on campus next to the Wellness Center. And then if you look at the bottom picture, this is how the place looked after the construction was done in 4.5 months. And then in 2022, Ian came along, and you can see what happened to the seawall. So I think the lesson here is the following. Certainly, we can protect a roadway. Certainly, we can do it with materials that will last 100 years at least. But is this the right strategy for taking care of nature? So if I could have the second slide. What we're doing here is work that would allow us to mitigate the impact of these hurricanes and not only protect a roadway, but in this case, building a reef, an artificial reef, we will have the ability to control also the erosion. So this is all work that is done in the College of Engineering, but with great collaboration from our colleagues at Erasmus. We could not do this without testing what these materials can do in terms of energy dissipation. The specialty also of the concrete is this is a biophilic concrete. It's a concrete that has obviously functional and structural functions, but also mimics what nature does. And so I think that the impact will be much less in terms of the ecosystem. So exciting times for us. We believe that the challenges that we are facing with climate change are really great opportunities to transform our society.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we could spend hours talking about the reef restoration and what that does in many other benefits, but that's a good transition to Katharine Mach, because she is presiding at our school of, at Rosenstiel School of Marine Atmospheric and Earth Sciences. And I wanted to ask you, Katharine, how can emerging innovations and experiences here in Miami support equitable, effective climate adaptations in our communities and obviously beyond our communities as well?
Yeah, thank you. So my work is really focused on thinking hard about, what does it mean to embrace our new climate reality and decrease vulnerability across entire communities, preparing for what's in store. And as you've heard from both of the speakers so far, that requires trying out new things, innovating, and measuring how well it goes. Learning from what's succeeding as well as what doesn't work on the first try as we boldly forge ahead. I'll give 2 examples, one on flooding and one on heat. So when it comes to flooding, it is hard to prepare for flooding in a changing climate. So first of all, the flood risks are changing, seas are rising, rainfall is getting more intense, and storms are intensifying in ways that make it increasingly unpredictable to figure out, do you evacuate or do you stay in place? But at the same time, people also are realizing that when it comes to the damages of flooding, it's not just about damages to our housing or mortality, the 2 things we historically focus on that are of paramount importance, but do not tell the full story of what happens to our health or our ability to get around town when flood waters come in. And we also have to recognize that this is about people taking action in their own homes. It's about governments taking action, and it's about businesses taking action all at the same time. And so what we've been doing is working with a whole new form of flood modeling that really breaks down the power structure of how we prepare for the future. So it used to be that a few engineers in the highest levels of government would be able to say, what if we put the seawall here, and we restore mangroves here, and we elevate homes here? But with this new technology that increasingly can be deployed globally, that can be in the hands of residents, small governments, businesses, both big and large, to really move towards science-informed solutions. And the super cool thing is this makes our efforts more effective, also more time efficient, and it increases participation in moving towards our futures. The other example that we've been working really hard on is heat. And it's kind of funny, right? Because this is a hot, humid place, like most of the tropics. But despite that, heat has been remarkably invisible to date. Partly that's because those of us here in this room have a lot of privilege, and we're sitting here in a very comfortable air-conditioned space, right? But what about the households that don't have air conditioning, or can't afford to turn it on, or have to work outdoors in the heat, or have factors that make them more vulnerable, like their age or their health status, or women who are pregnant? And so what we're doing is developing a whole new measurement and modeling approach that can basically say household by household, recognizing that one home might be fine at the same time that the next home has temperatures that could give them heat stroke. How do we understand that distribution of risk and really move towards solutions that need to be responsive to the fact that many of us, it's no problem, we'll be fine, at the same time that some people are really suffering? So Miami has just been an incredible place to trial all of these solutions because residents on the ground, local governments, businesses, Aspen Ideas is going on this week, are all moving forward together and really saying, how do we innovate? And also, how do we measure how we're doing so we can learn for solutions both here and also far beyond?
Thank you. That's super interesting. I mean, when you get to the adaptation part, and the policy tools that we have, and you, in a sense, also provide a very nice transition to ask Abigail, because you were addressing the issues of, Miami is also a very unequal society. And well, most places are actually, but Miami has very deep structural inequalities built into it. And so, as we talk from the point of view of the work you carry out at the clinic, Abigail, I wanted to ask you, how do we ensure that historical harms that have affected mostly Black and brown communities here in South Florida are actually not further aggravated or entrenched, sometimes even in the name of addressing the climate crisis?
Absolutely. I think oftentimes there's a narrative out there that there is urgency, and there's absolute urgency with the climate crisis. But at the same time, I think we need to reflect on the historical harms and make sure that those are not further entrenched with new policies. And there's so many ways we can do this. But I think first and most importantly, we have to acknowledge the history of disinvestment, systemic racism, and policy choices and practices that got us to where we are. If we don't acknowledge that history, there's risk of further exploitation of the same communities and entrenchment of those harms. Also, I think that when it comes to policy needs to be equitable, of course, and innovative, but it also needs to look back and reflect so that we can move forward. And those that have been plagued by these injustices, they need to be the co-designers and the co-creators of this policy. They need a seat at the table. And I think finally, when it comes to like, what can we do in the Climate Resilience Academy to ensure this? I think we have a duty as educators and researchers to ensure that our students are working collaboratively, that they're working cross disciplines, but that they also are building the professional skills needed to meet this great need. And how do we do that? We need to model collaboration. We need to model power sharing. We need to model transformative relationships and partnerships, not transactional ones. So it's a big task, but I think echoing a lot of what my colleagues are saying, there needs to be a power shift. There needs to be new frameworks and ideas that we can come to the table together, whether we're an engineer or a scientist or a lawyer, and really seek change, true systemic change.
Thank you. That's very interesting. We have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to let you articulate it in 1 minute, in the same order in which you spoke. What would be a final message that you would like to leave the audience with? Rudy.
Again, I want to stress collaboration, interdisciplinarity, partnerships. For instance, that course that I mentioned, it's a flipped classroom model where after watching a very high-level production lecture, the students come to the classroom and they work together on a problem. They problem solve using design methods. So this is exactly what you're talking about. This is the kind of shift. This is the way we do things differently in order actually to prepare for the big challenges, even in the classroom with a different pedagogy.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I have to say that course is fantastic. But Tony.
Well, 1 minute. I think to me, the major message is that what we do, you saw those slides, has to be done with the communities. This is an incredible opportunity for the academicians like myself to go out and work with others. And I hope that the academy will give us those tools. So to me, we cannot do it alone. We cannot do it in a room. We cannot do it in the lab. We got to do it with others. In addition, not only from a technological perspective, but what Katharine and Abigail have said, it has to be a contextual effort. And so I'm very excited. These are great times.
Absolutely. Katharine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I like to think about adaptation as something that people have always been doing, right? Our societies, our economies, our agricultural systems have been shifting rapidly over, frankly, millennia. And climate change is posing some hazards that are shifting really rapidly, but I think recognizing at the same time that we need to innovate, we can also draw from the past. And at the nexus of those, I'm really intrigued by something that I've been calling adaptation sandboxes. So how do we create spaces where we can deliberately test new things, recognizing from the perspective of government, that might mean deliberately being way more nimble when it comes to institutional and regulatory reform. On the technological side, it might recognize that some of these technologies are very fancy, others are actually pretty straightforward, we're just applying them in really new ways. And so here in Miami, we've got adaptation action areas, one example, and we're seeing a lot of things like that around the world that are basically saying, how do we deliberately foster places where we can try new things, being really clear about what we're hoping to achieve.
Thank you very much. Abigail.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Katie. Trying new things, trying new frameworks, and ensuring that we can possibly use those large scale, right? We know that the climate crisis is global, but I think the hyper-localized efforts that we have here are so important, they're essential. And I think the frameworks can be definitely used elsewhere and utilized in a big way. But again, I think going back to Tony and just ensuring that these things are focused on the community, that's a grassroots effort, and the communities that are most impacted and are most vulnerable not only take part in policy creation, but receive access to the benefits that the rest of us receive through these systems.
Thank you. Well, I hope you've seen a different side of the stereotype we have of academia. Here you have an architect, an engineer, a basic scientist, a lawyer, a policy scientist, a lawyer. And this is only a sampling. We have in the academy also people working on the upstream, on reducing emissions, on alternative sources of energy. And then this whole work around the issues of adaptation, mitigation, and resilience in the face of this existential challenge. This is not an ivory tower. This is a university that's focused on mobilizing the talent from every discipline, every field of work, to tackle the most consequential problem facing humanity. And it's not just for Miami, because we live in a local world where everything is local and everything is at the same time global. Whatever we do here will have repercussions around the world. Thank you again for your kind attention, and I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.